continuing our discussion of The Prince of Darkness, we look at the 1979 Dracula with Frank Langella, and then the 1992 directed by Francis Ford Coppola with Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder. I'm John Chan and Dan Edmonds.
Hello, fellow princes of darkness out there.
And yeah, I don't know if you have a favorite out of these so far and stuff that.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. All sort of different and interesting in their own way. I'm actually leaning towards the Francis Ford Coppola, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's just yeah, I'll get into it later, I guess, but it's so kind of, it's such a rich movie in terms, it's kind of like eating a 7-course meal and of the senses. It's just so over the top, but I kind of, in a way, yeah, I kind of like that about it. And yourself, which one did you lean towards?
Yeah, that's a tough one to beat. I have to, say that the 1979 one, I felt like was the strongest for its time of like kind of what it was able to do, and we'll of course like kind of likewise get into that. In fact, let's dive into it. Like for me, like probably one of the things that kind of really stood out for me is that it's the soundtrack. I mean, John Williams did this one, and I think that music really makes a difference. I mean, like you said, the 1992 one, definitely has a really strong soundtrack, and we'll talk about that as well. But and also, I think there's something about Frank Langella that he's an actor that definitely with Gary Oldman definitely gives him run for the money. But I think for me, he has more of the charisma, the natural kind of charm that really comes across, that's like kind of both menacing and yet just seductive and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was initially very sort of encouraged by the 1979 one.
Okay.
The cinematography looked really good. It looked like a decent budget production. The music was really good. It was very atmospheric, and it had a pretty much a mostly English cast. I mean, seeing as it was based in, seemed to be Yorkshire, which was a bit strange. Don't normally associate Dracula with Yorkshire, but I just like the fact that the accents were fairly consistent.
Compared to something,
yeah, we'll get into that. But so again, though, there was still certain things though that ended up going a bit awry for me, and not necessarily the way. I mean, one thing it was, this was by John Badham, the director of Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah.
And
Point of No Return, which we discussed.
Yes, Point of No Return, yeah. And I kind of felt a little bit like this was Saturday Night Dracula in a way, because we had Frank Langella with his big hair. He had like a big sort of collared cape. He's kind of like dancing away, romancing the various victims, and there's even kind of like strobing, and there's even a kind of a laser tunnel love sequence. I mean, he's pretty much the disco Dracula as I see it.
Okay.
The other thing that kind of threw me off, so I was actually quite happy with all of the, who can not like Donald Pleasance and Laurence Olivier. Normally people you could rely on to put in a good performance.
Sure.
And I would say what was kind of strange for me was that Donald Pleasance seemed to have just toned back his entire performance. Like to, if you see him in Halloween, this is a very kind of toned down performance compared to that. Whereas Laurence Olivier seems to make up for it in virtually every respect. He's doing some weird, over-the-top kind of Eastern European accent that occasionally sounds Scottish. And but everyone else does a bit of a pretty good performance. I would say, Harker, can't remember the guy, he's an English actor. He's been in lots of TV. In fact, there's a lot of British TV actors in this movie.
Okay.
And he was a bit dull, really. He was kind of like a bit of a sort of 70s lad about town. And
Right.
yeah, so it would, I found it a little bit dull after a while, to be honest with you. I think I just kind of I think also the fact that it seemed like Mina, was it Mina or was it Lucy? Yeah, Lucy, basically, because Mina gets turned into a vampire pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And
It's interesting that they kind of flipped around. Like normally it's Lucy is
the one who becomes the bride of Dracula immediately.
Right.
And then Mina becomes like the prolonged love interest.
Yes.
So they flipped that around in this,
as well as
setting it in Yorkshire randomly.
Yeah.
But and they also, the other major difference was that Donald Pleasance's character, Seward, who is the kind of doctor, Lucy is his daughter in this one.
Yes.
And Mina is Helsing's daughter in this one. So
normally
Helsing, normally Helsing is a kind of satellite character. In this one, they obviously tried to inject more kind of emotional impact by making the father of Mina, who dies. So that was kind of an interesting change. And I guess the idea was to make, they thought, oh yeah, man, we're gonna, not only is like Helsing going to be Laurence Olivier, but he's going to be there avenging his daughter. This is going to be some powerful stuff. And it turns out to be just some very strange, over-the-top acting that has a very bizarre accent. But, not bad, all in all. And of course, I got confused because I thought Donald Pleasance was Mina's father at one stage. And when she dies, he seems so very blasé about it. And I thought, he's not really bothered about this at all.
I thought it was actually really funny. I don't know if it was intentional, but just like some of the comments that he makes and stuff, he seems like just very like either socially inept or just really like, just lacked empathy of any kind of stuff.
Totally.
Not quite on the psychopathic level that we talk about normally, but more like an autistic and kind of like somebody who's like been in academia a little too long and stuff.
Yeah, he's not on Blofeld level, but he's
right.
Somewhere along those. I mean, that's the weird thing, you're going from like Blofeld or the psychologist in Halloween. This is it's incredibly by the numbers performance. It's quite strange, really. So and there was also the other thing that I noticed about Frank Langella that really I couldn't stop sort of staring at in a way. His eyes constantly twitch back left and right all the time. I don't know if you noticed that, but like his eyes just constantly moving.
Slight,
it's quite unnerving. I
guess
which is I mean, I guess in a way that's supposed to be, that's good if you're Dracula, but I kind of I just found it a bit weird, really. The most interesting part for me, most off-kilter part, was the fact that Van Helsing used a vampire hunting horse. It's the first time I've ever seen a horse used to find the grave of a vampire. That was very strange. I've not seen that before, but
or since.
The vampire hunting horses. Maybe there's a movie in that. The other oddly, I would say, slightly Oedipal thing is the bit where Jan Francis, who's playing Mina, is Laurence Olivier as Van Helsing, finally confronts her and stakes her as she's sort of weirdly trying to seduce her father. And then he ends up kind of staking her. And she's kind of quite orgasmic at that moment. It felt a little bit dodgy in that scene. And
they definitely. I was gonna say they played up like kind of the different variety kind of moments and stuff.
And the only other thing that really threw me was where I think they've only just started to realize that Dracula might actually be a vampire. And I think sort of Van Helsing confronts him, and and I don't know, I can't remember exactly how he does it, but there's a mirror in the room. And Frank Langella just walks in, picks up a vase and just hurls it at the mirror and smashes it, and you're just like, right, if that didn't give away that you're Dracula, I don't know what does. And he's just thinking, sorry, I don't like mirrors.
Right.
still don't do that. If you go into someone's house and just start randomly smashing things, that's
Right.
kind of so at that point it obviously becomes very obvious.
I mean, I felt like they had some striking effects and stuff where I think it's partially because of John Badham and stuff, but it really was effective, like kind of like the climbing on the walls and the kind of just like, it didn't look like wire work. It kind of seemed like kind of something that was and also like kind of just overall like I thought the vampire like like when Mina turns, I mean, she's like, like it's horrific, kind of, like, like the transformation.
Yeah, no, the glowing red eyes and the makeup prosthetics were pretty good, actually.
Yeah,
quite good.
The sanitarium being the central kind of place for a lot of the things, I thought it was an interesting kind of statement, and I felt like it was more of a statement, not so much of the insanity, but just the that. Like where if you have any kind of sexual desire, you're considered mad. Like kind of like I think they played up the idea of Victorian, kind of the attitude towards sex and how that if you're anything have any kind of desire or stuff like that, it's not natural. It's kind of considered a madness and stuff. And the cure is like religion or like kind of science to some degree and stuff.
Yeah. Well, though, what's rather incongruous about this and the 92 version is that they're actually set in the Edwardian sort of period because there's cars and various other things going around. Whereas, the originals were Victorian, like the hammer. It made me realize actually watching this that by far the 1958 is the least silly of all of the Dracula adaptations, at least that we watched.
Right.
Yeah, but the first two are definitely Victorian, I would say.
And that's probably more like the 50, kind of version is actually more low budget. So, like, so you would almost think that they would be more kind of blasé about research or kind of, like, but yeah, like you said, throwing in the cars. I don't know. At the same time, maybe in this case, it seemed like the case that like the cars are just kind of coming into the scene and stuff. They're like kind of like it's kind of there's moments where like it seemed like kind of like people were looking at it like, what is that kind of thing and stuff.
Yeah, the other major difference with this one, of course, to the previous ones is that it starts with the ship crashing on the shore. So you really don't get any of the story of the real estate deal, someone going to visit Dracula in his castle or anything else. It's much more played on this sort of idea that there's a new romantic stranger in town who's a mystery sort of figure who somehow seduces the doctor's daughter, basically, and this much more kind of romantic angle is the sort of tone of the movie. But for me, though, that kind of, in a way, that isn't really what the original book intention is about. Because I mean, if we think about it in terms of, this is Bram Stoker writing about, Oscar Wilde being sort of persecuted for his sexuality and things. It's really more, I think Dracula, in keeping with that, is more a statement on people's attitudes towards sexuality that's different or deviant by that particular time's sort of outlook. And this isn't really about that at all. It's more just about sort of, I guess fear of outsiders maybe, or sort of mysterious strangers as love interests. I suppose you could say it's about, sexuality as well, because there is still that element, but certainly not to the same degree as some of the others, I would say, some of the other adaptations.
Definitely. I thought it was interesting that the garlic kind of, is a little bit more front and center, where like kind of this time it's like where it's really offensive to the people who are infected, I guess, by vampirism and stuff. And one thing that I thought was, I kind of did a little research, and it turns out that garlic actually does have an antibacterial effect. So going back to the roots of it, like kind of with Nosferatu stuff, like kind of that that this is about disease to some degree. So I'm wondering if like kind of, it's that thing of we've talked about before, that with some of these myths, there's kind of some of these folklore roots that have basis or grounding in something that's very practical, very much like real.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I think garlic is pretty much a foundation of most Indian cooking. It's almost like the basis of just about every meal, and I think a lot of probably in Asian cooking too. And it's a lot of health benefits. It's no wonder it gets sort of woven into stories, perhaps. It doesn't, in my experience, ward off evil, unfortunately, but
well, it certainly wards off any seductive what's called amorous desires, I guess, if you have a little too much garlic.
Yes, both normative and not normative amorous advances, that's for sure. Yeah. Speaking of normative and non-normative forms of amorous behavior, maybe this is as good a time as any to move on to the 1992 version, unless you've got any other bits.
One last thing was I thought that we talked about the setting being the sanitarium stuff. There was one interesting comment I thought was that when Dr. Seward, like kind of is asked whether he prescribed laudanum for his own daughter, he goes, "My own daughter, certainly not." So it was interesting that it's something that they would give to just like to any kind of typical, I guess, patient, but then like he wouldn't give it to his own daughter. Like, I thought that was an interesting attitude for a doctor. Like, it almost seems like it's beyond ethical to say something like that, or to have that approach.
Yeah, there's also that bit where they're talking about giving is it Mina some medicine, and Dracula's there going, no, don't put that stuff in your blood. Like, yeah.
Because laudanum is an opiate, so it was like kind of, I guess the people that were in the know, they prescribed it, but then they also knew that that's some pretty bad stuff. It's gonna, probably like they did realize like kind of the addictive properties even at that point stuff, even though they were prescribing it.
Yeah, it's funny actually. Now you sort of mention it. One thing that does occur to me in some of the sort of adaptations of Dracula is that once they've been there, there's a sort of a weird connection to addiction, because it seems like when someone's first bitten by Dracula, they're then almost like, you always see them kind of like opening the windows, opening they're all ready for it, and it's almost like kind of an addictive kind of quality that they're sort of trying to portray, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, granted the puncture wounds are on the neck and stuff like that, but I could almost imagine just as easily it could be on somebody's arms and kind of. So like, where if it was like a needle, like kind of that. In fact, that's an interesting. I'm not sure there's a vampire movie that involves like kind of drugs, or I think The Thirst maybe. I think that was like that was one in the 80s that maybe that's something we'll kind of have to look at some point and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, but I mean, it has a lot of sort of analogies in that, that's a very strong desire that is non-sexual, very similar sort of story to what Dracula might be about. Yeah.
So on to 1992.
1992, Francis Ford Coppola's. Now, I have a funny story about this. I went and saw this at the cinema when I was 17. Yep. And I just remember I was with a bunch of guys, and we'd somehow managed to get some alcohol to drink with us.
Oh, no.
And before we were all underage, and we were all quite drunk, and we went to go and see this movie. And I just remember it seeming like such a sensory overload. There was one thing after another. There's like Monica Bellucci naked, and then there's like people crawling down the walls, people licking razor blades, and one of the guys actually threw up halfway through the movie. Huh. And it just seemed like almost like the natural thing to do halfway through this movie. Okay. It was so over the top that it's kind of like, what else would happen when you Yeah, I mean, my word. I mean, I don't know what Francis Ford Coppola must have thought when he made this. He must have kind of said, hey, people liked that Colonel Kurtz character in Apocalypse Now. No. I'll just make every single character Colonel Kurtz. That's it. That's how I make the perfect movie.
Interesting.
I mean, it's almost unwatchable for the English accents. I mean, Keanu Reeves, or Keanu, as much as I like him, I mean, his accent is
Yeah,
possibly one of the worst. You know, it's right up there with Dick
he,
Van Dyke. You know,
he was seriously criticized for that. You know,
yeah,
and I guess this is like fairly early in his career. You know, like what's it called? I think before that he'd only really done. I'm trying to think of some of the kind of things. Yeah, like he had done most of his you know, he's done the Bill and Ted's, that was kind of '89 stuff. Speed was still to come, that was '94. He did Point Break, so I think at that time he was still kind of just, you know, getting
yeah.
the momentum. I mean, you know, this is of course, you know, well before the Matrix and the things that we kind of, you know him now for, you know, the John Wick series and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, he's only, you know, Winona Ryder is only mildly better than him. Her accent's also absolutely atrocious in this as well. And what's funny is that you've got Anthony Hopkins and Gary Oldman, who are two really good English actors.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, it obviously didn't, the accent didn't rub off on those two. And it's just funny that, I mean, that no one thought, I think Francis Ford Coppola, I read an interview or watched an interview and something, he said, I knew his accent was bad, but I just liked him so much that he's such a nice guy. But I just thought, just go with it, you know. Kind of funny.
And I think at that point Keanu did start having like some box office draw. So that's actually one of the main reasons why he was chosen. You know, kind of that he was a young actor that, you know, kind of was a likable, you know, hero and stuff like that. And, you know, like I think, you know, despite that, you know, he is still likable. He's you know, he's definitely very out of his element and stuff like that. But I think we started kind of, even at that point, like we root for him and like you know, like kind of, I think it's like kind of maybe we're cringing, but like we're kind of like still going, come on, you can do it.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing. And then of course you've got like, and so the other thing with this movie is that Francis Ford Coppola described, I think, the type of effects that he wanted to various sort of special effects people, and he said, I want these all to be done live. I don't want it to be done post-production.
Right.
And everyone just kind of laughed at him, saying this already, I mean, I'm pretty certain if I read the description of the effects in Bram Stoker's Dracula, I'd be like, what the hell is going on here? So anyway, he ended up hiring his son, who actually kind of recreated all of these things using live sort of stage effects almost, I guess, which is pretty impressive, actually. It's one of those things where that's why this looks kind of weirdly amateurish, but not at the same time. But I think by the end of the movie, I was actually impressed by what was achieved by it all.
And like apparently, they, you know, really like kind of, you know, it's one of those things that like when you dig more into Coppola's kind of history, he tends to go over budget and what's it called, it's kind of like they were just expecting a bonfire of the vampires, like, you know, like the box office bomb that Bonfire of the Vanities was and stuff. And you know, amazingly enough, he came, you know, within budget and you know, on time and stuff. And it overall it did really well in the box office as well, which is again not, you know, by no means typical, despite the fact that, like, you know, this is the director of The Godfather stuff, but he's definitely still. There's a lot of, you know, like misses that he's had over the years.
It's funny because, I mean, you would not necessarily equate The Godfather with this movie. If I had to describe this movie in like one little soundbite, it would be that it feels like a very long gay music video, but without any music, is how I kind of describe it. There's just so many, everything is just, you're bombarded by lots of different images, you know, but there's lots of very sort of interesting costume design. Some of the costume design is really cool. I mean,
absolutely.
Gary Oldman, you know, he goes from weird muscle-suited soldier as Vlad the Impaler. Although in this story, for some reason, he's given the ridiculous name of Dracula. But so then he's that, and then he's kind of like the widow, twanky, old woman in a kimono Dracula. Doing licking things and stuff like this, and then he transforms into Edwardian rock star Dracula, who's just like really cool with his sort of John Lennon shades and top hat. And so he's all over the place and just like overacting like there's no tomorrow. I mean, it's just.
I think he still pulls it off though. Like
Oh,
I guess
yeah, I mean,
that's the thing about Gary Oldman, that like he's this chameleon that like he goes from scene to scene, and like it's like these ultimate transformations that like in each one he's so like you swear it's like a different person. It's not just Gary Oldman putting on another suit and stuff.
I mean, it's pretty amazing. And then of course he's like the giant. I mean, he goes from old man to young man to Batman, in that he's kind of the monster bat,
the human bat,
human bat creature. But he definitely commits to it all. But it's so. I mean, everything is so. He's just like reveling in it. I mean, it's incredible. And the only one who I'd say, well, actually, there's plenty of people who give him a run for his money. You've got Richard E. Grant as the kind of heroin-addled sanitarium Dr. Seward, who's there sort of like almost as mad as his inmates and injecting himself with heroin.
Seriously.
And then you've got Anthony Hopkins, who's kind of doing a weird, sort of vaguely Eastern European accent and sort of dry humping Billy Campbell and laughing like a maniac and sort of occasionally going, yeah, Dracula, like this. And you're like, it's just, yeah.
When I first watched it, I didn't realize that he was also the priest. When I watched it this time around, I was like, kind of like, is that Anthony Hopkins also? Like the priest that like is kind of basically telling, Vlad, like, you don't forsake God kind of thing and stuff like that. And then so it is interesting how they do this kind of thing that we talked about before, that there's this kind of echo in time thing where, like Mina was also the wife of, kind of Vlad in quote unquote the old days. And so she's kind of reincarnated as Mina and stuff.
Yeah, I guess there's there is this theme previously of like Mina being, something that draws Dracula or Nosferatu towards her. But this one, they actually sort of give her a backstory and everything. And this kind of, I mean, they again sort of add this love story, but in this one, I think it kind of works a little bit better because it's a kind of, he brings that kind of weird desperation that you saw in Nosferatu. And there's also this kind of theme of, reincarnation and loving someone across like hundreds of years. It's kind of an interesting concept.
Actually, Winona Ryder, like, different. This was like one of the scripts that came across her desk, so to speak. And so she, really loved the romantic story that kind of emphasized, and so she's the one who actually brought the script to Francis Ford Coppola and said, "Hey, you got to take a look at this and everything." And it's funny that that was actually what's called like in the shadow, or kind of the what's called after, like, she had kind of at the last minute kind of taken off from The Godfather Part 3, that she was supposed to play the role that ultimately Coppola's daughter played and stuff. And so like kind of they were like kind of shaky terms and stuff, but I guess kind of not totally kind of unfavorable terms and everything. So but here we are, kind of they end up working together. So that was an interesting chain of events, I thought.
No, I mean, I think she actually does a pretty decent job in this. I would say towards the end, actually, when there's the sort of more, I think when she's actually sort of more involved with Dracula, that's actually when she's at the best part of this movie, and not just sort of ruminating about Jonathan going away, going, "Oh, I thought Jonathan would be back by now, and I miss him so terribly." Using that weird sort of English accent. That bit was, but towards the end, I thought it was pretty good. I think, really though, we often criticize movies for doing too much exposition and not telling a story visually. This is almost like the opposite. Everything is told so visually in this. And there's so many kind of visual things being thrown at you. It's almost, in a way, I kind of put it in the same bucket as something like Showgirls, in that there is so much being thrown at you,
Right.
that it becomes a kind of a hyper real experience. And that's kind of what I see this as. It's in the same way that a movie doesn't have to be realistic, and it can be a kind of a statement. It can be kind of something that kind of just bombards your senses, a bit like Verhoeven Showgirls. This is a similar sort of thing. I mean, it's just relentless, this movie. Every scene there's something weird going on. You've got the shadow like throttling Jonathan Harker at the beginning, crawling up the walls.
I thought that was an interesting play on the mirror thing and stuff. Like this one, they didn't really, kind of like that was like almost their way of dealing with the kind of the mirror kind of part of the myth and stuff. And like I thought that was like something that was really like unique to this movie and stuff that they like how they played with that idea.
Yeah. Then you got sexy vampires like feeding on Keanu Reeves, and then weird flying old man Dracula levitating into the room and then giving them a baby to eat. And I mean, it's like every scene is just relentless. It almost feels like there's almost too much. It feels like it's kind of and because they're all practical effects, it almost has this feeling of like you're on the Haunted Mansion ride at Disney. It sort of feels like things are just like popping out at you every time. It doesn't really, I would say in this, it's so much of a spectacle. You don't really care about any of the characters really, other than Dracula, just because you kind of want to see what weird thing he does next, really.
Right.
But there's no real actual, I suppose there's a kind of an emotional connect. And that's the weird thing is, despite all of this, insanity, you do kind of, you do still kind of feel sorry for Dracula a little bit, and you kind of think, oh, well, he's kind of, this, but yeah. And there's also
I thought that was something that like kind of that they achieved that none of the others really do, is that like he's a really sympathetic character. I mean, like I think that like this, out of all different ones, you really feel like this is somebody like that like you want to kind of ultimately end up with his long lost wife, and like kind of maybe somehow find peace and everything. And I thought that was like one thing that kind of really made this one stand out compared to the others.
Yeah, I mean, I just had so many questions watching this movie again. Okay. There's so many. I was just like, why does he have white hair on his palms? Like, why does Renfield have weird wire hands?
Speaking of which, it's Tom Waits playing Renfield. That's an amazing casting choice.
Yeah. I mean, it was good. I mean, again, like clearly way over the top, like everyone else, staying with the bar there. But yeah, I mean, and then of course, why was everybody in the sanitarium wearing little cages on their heads? It was sort of like, yeah, we're trying to make a statement about, are the people in the cells really the mad ones, or the guards are just as mad? But it kind of just was so over in your face that it seemed kind of ridiculous. Yeah, I mean,
and I thought the other thing that kind of
upside down.
I thought the other thing that kind of makes this one stand out is the fact that like they kind of dive into this backstory of like kind of that Dracula is actually somebody who turns his back on God, and kind of say like screw you, like my wife is dead, and I kind of I'm going to the dark side and stuff. And I guess in some ways it's kind of you mentioned before about the Star Wars connection and stuff, and ultimately that's really what Star Wars kind of was like, kind of that Vader just basically at the death of his beloved, like kind of basically said, screw you, light force, I'm going to the dark side.
Absolutely. Yeah, I missed that connection. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and of course, he has all these same dark side powers. Dracula does, is obviously a dark side force practitioner. In this one, he seems to also be a sort of a circus magician as well as being a telepath and telekinesis wielder. But
I thought that was another interesting aspect, was how he kind of takes Mina on this tour of like, or actually she's supposed to take him on a tour, but then he ends up like kind of basically almost like kind of taking her for a ride and stuff like that, or like kind of through you said these different amusements of the time and stuff, of kind of this mix of like the first movies to the shadow puppets and stuff.
Yeah, and I thought that was what was kind of, I guess, somewhat sort of keeping in the spirit perhaps of the original book, is this idea of what would have been seen as sort of, slightly out of the normal sexuality or experiences for the 90s would be, you and 3 female vampires or going to some weird freak show,
right,
sort of thing. It's, I think by that respect, it's kind of keeping the spirit of it very much. And there was also kind of a homage to Nosferatu, I felt, in that, the use of the stop motion effects, because
right.
there's so many sort of, I lost count of the number of times there's a transition from one shape on the screen going to the next shape. It's like there were so many in this movie. But there's like a whole sequence where they've almost sort of shot him when he arrives in London in stop motion, and then they do it again later on. And I almost felt like the whole shadow attacking Jonathan was a kind of an homage to the Nosferatu shadow that creeps up on I guess it's Mina in the original. There's also a very, and I think this is, you actually sow the seeds in this movie for Van Helsing and Twilight and Underworld and all these kind of things, because you've got this long action sequence right at the end where you've got the three of Lucy's kind of suitors who are all kind of, and it's almost like a cowboys and Indians.
I was gonna say, had a very Western feel.
Which was kind of strange. And then there's the kind of showdown at the end.
Right.
But I think when it was quite unexpected. I remember watching that originally and thinking, wow, this is like an action movie all of a sudden. And I think probably other producers thought, oh yeah, we can just make all supernatural stuff into an action movie.
Right.
As we will see in some of our other Universal monster series. But
yes.
Yeah, it was quite a weird change of pace. But I mean, I would say that's what's quite interesting about this movie, is that it goes through lots of different almost genres during the course of the movie. You know, it's 1 minute it's soft porn, next minute it's sort of pseudo horror, next minute it's sort of a mystery movie, and 1 minute it's psychological, and then it's an action movie. It's all over the shop.
Definitely.
And I found myself, you know, swinging on a pendulum from absolutely hating it to thinking, oh, this is pretty cool actually, and then kind of going backwards and forwards all the way through this movie. So
yeah, and you know, we kind of briefly mentioned about the music and stuff. I guess Wojciech Kilar, a Polish classic composer, you know, kind of did this one. And I thought like it was like kind of, you know, like next to the Coppola's, it's kind of one of the best music for these, you know, the Dracula movies and stuff by far.
Yeah, it's definitely very fitting with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
I think also a mention has to go to, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Eiko Ishioka, who's the costume designer. Turns out she was the graphic designer for the Apocalypse Now movie poster, which is really one of the most iconic movie posters out there.
Yeah.
And she did a lot of the outfits, which are pretty amazing actually.
Yeah.
And
especially like you said, that the armor, it's something else like that.
Yeah, I'd never seen anything like that. And also she went on to do a lot of the outfits for Tarzan Singh's movies, like The Cell and I guess Immortals and various other things.
You can definitely see The Cell, like kind of, you know, like with the armor and stuff, like kind of like has that similar effect with the.
Yeah, it's almost like it's got this kind of like 90s haute couture, weirdly sort of biological kind of feeling to it. It's
right.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah. As I say, though, overall, I just felt I almost felt like it was too much by the end of the movie. I felt like my eyes were just like tired of watching all these different sort of things by the end of it. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure like kind of what drove, you know, like I said, the kind of the sensory overload that Coppola is going for stuff. It's definitely, especially towards the end, a lot more. You know, a lot quicker pace than the typical, you know, kind of, I mean, yeah, you know, kind of Godfather kind of has some action sequences and stuff, but overall though, like you usually don't see like kind of that action kind of drive that that's not a signature of his movies and stuff. So, but at the same time, they won't spoil the ending, but it does kind of slow down a bit for kind of the more dramatic effect, I guess. So I guess it's like kind of they want to kind of really slam into the ending and kind of build up to that kind of dramatic moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very strange though. I mean, it's a really weird movie, and they're just not what you would expect from the person who made Apocalypse Now and Godfather.
Right. And it definitely won quite a bit of awards, for like the costume design, sound effects, makeup. So it like kind of did well in the box office and was recognized for all kind of it did too as well, for effects and stuff. But yeah, I think in the end, there's like kind of just, I don't know, I guess at least for us, like a interesting kind of way to conclude our Dracula discussions and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, considering what came after it with stuff like Twilight and things like this, it's still considerably better than a lot of other Dracula movies. I guess the other one we didn't do is Dracula Untold, but that's kind of even sillier than this, I would say. In that they really did take it to be a kind of a action movie.
Action, yeah. I think like that's maybe like in some ways what the struggle has been for this particular kind of series, is that like a lot of things have been done, a lot of things are now kind of taken for granted as being part of the Dracula lore. And so Twilight was kind of taking it in the direction of kind of making a teen movie, of course. And then, like I said, they took it to action. Another kind of similar kind of idea, I guess, is the one with Kate. I'm trying to think of her name and stuff. With the werewolves and stuff.
Underworld.
Underworld, the Underworld series. They kind of take it, kind of to make it it's kind of a werewolf versus vampire, eternal war and stuff. And then was the Snipes, of course, was in this where now like kind of the vampire's the hero and everything.
Blade, yeah.
Blade, yeah.
Yeah, I thought Blade was actually probably one of the best sort of, reinventions of a vampire story, really. But then we've also got Morbius coming out soon as well, which is another similar sort of thing. So, yeah.
So, yeah, I think, definitely, I think that's the challenge of going forward, like in the future remakes is, like kind of last thing we need is another rehashing of the Dracula myth and stuff. But if if you're going to do something interesting, I think there's definitely going to be an audience for it, and certainly we'll be here ready to discuss it, I guess.
You're ready to any other future remakes? Should they turn up?
So coming up, I think we'll be talking about the Mummy next, and then in other episodes we'll be looking at Frankenstein, and finally the werewolf or Wolfman. So yeah, once again, John Chang with Dan Edmonds. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the movies.